Canada is the largest trading partner of the US, and the US is the largest trading partner of Canada. The relationship is constructive, fairly reciprocal, and symmetric, and has been stable and mutually beneficial for hundreds of years. Understanding our northern neighbor, therefore, is an important part of taking place in the international business community. Here we can see Canada is only second to the European Union in terms of volume of imports. Relative to other countries, Canada is number one in terms of both US imports and exports. We're going to talk about a very particular import, but first I'd like to show you the relationship. Canada is really a collection of provinces which each have an independent profile, each have an independent trade profile with the US, and here you can see that imports and exports relatively follow each other over time, whereas exports, though, are generally greater. What we're going to be talking about is a very particular export, maple syrup, and that is overwhelmingly produced by Quebec, perhaps the most distinct of the Canadian provinces. The history is different, and that's reflected in both the legal code and as well as the cultural background, not simply the language. Maple syrup in Quebec is produced inhomogeneously, and curiously, the greatest production is in more rural Quebec, far from the population centers and far from the central control of the province. This has a reflection both in the discussion that will follow regarding the particular organization of maple syrup in Quebec. It's organized by a federation of producers that is a private organization dating from the mid-1960s, and it regulates the supply of maple syrup by regulation of production quotas to members for selling to third-party distributors. Of the 7,000 producers in the province, the vast majority of this is controlled by the society. Quebec, conversely, controls the vast majority of maple syrup production in Canada. You can think of Quebec as the Saudi Arabia of maple syrup, and FPAC, the Organization of Producers, as OPEC. And with this market share comes great power. The association has the ability to, by fiat and by agreement, to monitor the farmers' production of maple syrup, seize private property if they believe they're overproducing, require their power bills to prove that they're not over-sugaring, and this causes conflict. For example, there's over 1,000 standing applications for new producers waiting a quota assignment. The control and the suppression of production of existent members for the purposes of price support, but it also circumvents the market and causes inflation of prices. Before FPAC, though, there was no uniform quality control. There were wide price fluctuations, there were booms and busts typical of any market, and there was significant price competition. FPAC is a solution matching Canadian and Quebecois sensibilities for collective action. It has less emphasis on the free market. But there are inherent problems. There's a loss of market share. There's legal and social challenges from excluded entrants and unsatisfied participants. And a few years ago in 2012, there was theft. There was over 1,000 tons of the strategic reserve of maple syrup stolen. And free riders sold this to local markets. But here you can see the impact of this control. The production of maple syrup and the market share in Quebec is still huge, but it has recently declined. And because of price competition, Maine, Vermont, and other Canadian provinces are slowly eroding into the market share of Quebec syrup producers. And this is pathognomonic of other controlled or protected industries in Canada. Examples include the energy sector, Hydro-Quebec, dairy, poultry, eggs, and liquor. This selection of maple syrup was chosen not just because it's palatable, but because it's emblematic of protected industries in Quebec. And this shows two different views. One as a protection of trade being a goal on self, whereas you can see the person lighting the fuse to actually do himself harm where he thinks he's going to do himself good. But there's another view too, and that is that these are necessary protectives in a world economy. Because as we talked about in the beginning of the course, the world is flat. And consequently, protectionism like this of some kind will manifest in order to avoid competition to the lowest common denominator. How Quebec and the rest of the world deal with these constraints That's for the future to decide. Thank you for your time.